The road did not announce itself. It rose out of the desert like a pale scar, a ribbon of dirt pressed flat by wagon wheels and stubborn feet. Heat hovered just above it, thin and wavering, as if the land itself were breathing slow and tired. Naya Redbird walked with her hand wrapped around her sister's wrist. Lila's fingers were small, warm, restless. They swung between them as they crossed the open stretch toward the edge of the frontier town. Wood buildings leaned against one another like old men sharing secrets. A water trough glinted in the sun. Somewhere a hammer rang once, then went quiet. Naya kept her eyes forward. Dust clung to the hem of her skirt. The wind tugged at the loose strands of her hair. She had learned to walk like this, steady, unhurried, as if nothing in the world could hurry her, even when everything inside her already was. A wagon crested the hill behind them. The sound came first, a hard rattle of wood and iron, too fast, too heavy. The driver's shout cracked through the air, sharp and careless. The wheels hit loose gravel and skidded, throwing dust in a pale cloud. Lila saw the apple before Naya did. It bounced from the wagon bed and rolled across the road, red and bright against the dirt. Lila's hand slipped free. "Lila!" The child ran. Her boots were too big. She stumbled, laughed, reached for the apple with both hands. The wagon surged closer, the wheels sliding, the horses snorting and straining against leather in fear. Naya moved, but the ground felt thick, like it was trying to hold her back. A shadow broke from the fence line. A man vaulted the low rail without breaking stride. His boots hit the road and slid. He lunged, one arm sweeping under the child's ribs, the other bracing against the dirt. He turned his back to the wagon as he fell, curling around Lila like a shield. The wheel passed close enough to spit gravel against his coat. Then the road went quiet. Dust drifted down in slow, lazy spirals. The wagon rattled on, the driver never looking back. The man stood up. He set Lila on her feet, steadying her until she found her balance. His coat was streaked with dirt. His hands were scraped, knuckles already darkening. He didn't curse. He didn't laugh. He just looked at the child to make sure she was whole. Naya reached them, breath tight in her chest. She pulled Lila close, one hand pressing between her sister's shoulder blades like she could still feel the wagon's wind there. Lila clutched the apple, wide-eyed now, silent. The man straightened. He was tall, broad in the shoulders, built the way men got built when they worked land instead of talking about it. His hat was pushed back on his head, his hair dark with dust and sweat. His eyes were a pale, steady blue that didn't rush to meet anything. They settled on Naya and stayed there. For a moment, none of them spoke. "You shouldn't let her run loose on a road like this," he said. His voice wasn't sharp. It wasn't gentle either. It was flat, like a fence post driven into the ground and left there. Naya lifted her chin. "She doesn't run, not usually." He looked at the apple in Lila's hands, then back at Naya. The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile. "Roads don't care about usually," and he said. Naya studied him. The dust on his boots, the calluses on his hands. The way he stood, weight balance, like he expected the ground to shift under him at any moment. "Thank you," she said. He nodded once, as if thanks were a small thing and didn't need to be carried far. "What's your name?" Lila asked suddenly, her voice thin and curious. Naya tensed. The man looked down at the child, then back at Naya. "Rafe," he said. It wasn't a full answer. It was enough of one. Naya hesitated. The wind lifted again, warm and dry, carrying the smell of wood smoke and horse sweat from the town. She felt the weight of the road behind her, the land ahead of her, and all the things she wasn't supposed to say sitting heavy in her chest. "Ash," she said. It wasn't her name. It was just a word that felt small enough to carry. Rafe nodded like he accepted it the same way he accepted the dirt on his coat. They stood there, three figures, on a road that didn't belong to any of them. Neither of them said what mattered. Naya didn't say that men with papers and maps were circling her family's land like buzzards. She didn't say that her father, Bram Redbird, had started talking about agreements and signatures instead of seasons and rain. She didn't say that her name had begun to feel like something that could be traded. Rafe didn't say that he had spent the morning walking fence lines and following the thin, stubborn line of a creek that cut through Apache ground. He didn't say that he had a meeting waiting in town with Silas Vane and a stack of documents from the territory office. He didn't say that water was becoming more valuable than gold. They let the space between them hold all of it. Rafe stepped back toward the fence. "Keep her close," he said. Naya tightened her grip on Lila's hand. "I do." He tipped his hat, not like a gentleman, but like a man acknowledging another presence in the same stretch of hard country. Then he turned and walked along the fence line, boots crunching soft over gravel and dry grass. Naya watched him go. Lila squeezed her hand. "He runs fast," she said. Naya didn't answer. She watched the dust settle behind Rafe Mercer's back until the road looked empty again. Then she turned toward the town, her sister beside her, the apple bright and unbitten between them. They walked on like strangers who had almost met. But the road remembered. The horse trough sat at the edge of town like a promise no one bothered to keep. The water inside it was low and warm, ringed with dust where hooves had stepped too close. Flies stitched lazy patterns across the surface. Naya came there with Lila at midday, when the sun pressed straight down and the street went quiet. Most folks stayed inside then, doors half closed, waiting for the heat to pass. Rafe was already there. He stood with one boot on the trough's wooden lip, holding a tin cup to the mouth of a gray horse whose ribs showed through its hide. The animal drank slow, stubborn, like it didn't trust the water or the day. Rafe glanced up when Naya's shadow crossed the dirt. He didn't smile. He didn't look away. "Your sister still chasing apples?" he asked. Lila beamed and held up a small cloth bag this time. "I brought bread." Rafe nodded at that, like bread was a sensible thing to chase. Naya rested her hand on the horse's neck. The animal flicked an ear, then leaned into her touch. Its skin felt warm and alive under the thin coat. "He won't lie down," Rafe said. "Not at night. Walks the fence like he's counting posts." "Maybe he's waiting for something," Naya said. "Maybe he's just tired of being alone," Rafe replied. They didn't look at each other when they said it. They met again outside May Carter's store. The place smelled of coffee grounds and oiled wood. A bell hung over the door, too tired to ring most days. May stood behind the counter, sleeves rolled, eyes sharp as a hawk's, even when she smiled. "You two keep finding each other," she said, sliding a small sack of flour toward Naya. "Town's not that big." Rafe leaned against a post, hat low. "Some places are quieter than others." May snorted. "Quiet's just noise waiting its turn." She went back to her ledger, leaving them with the dust in the slow-moving afternoon. They walked a few steps together, then stopped, like they had reached an invisible line neither of them wanted to cross. The wind came down the street, warm and dry, rattling a loose sign above the saloon. It carried the smell of old wood and distant rain that never quite made it here. "Your fence," Naya said. "The one along the low ridge. It sings when the wind hits it right." Rafe tilted his head, listening like he could hear it from here. "Sounds like wire pulled too tight." "Sounds like something trying not to break," Naya said. Rafe's mouth moved, almost a smile, almost not. Later, under the old porch where Edith Crow sold cornbread, wrapped in brown paper, they sat on opposite ends of a worn bench. Edith watched them over her spectacles, sharp and amused, like a woman who had lived long enough to recognize a story when it walked past. "You two going to talk?" she said. "Or just share the same air until it gets awkward?" Rafe took a bite of the bread. Naya did the same. The crumb was dry, the taste simple and good. "It's already awkward," Rafe said. Edith laughed, a low, satisfied sound. "Then you're doing it right." She went back to her small stove, leaving them with the shade and the quiet. They talked about small things. About the wind that came hard from the north and flattened the grass like it was laying the land down to sleep. About the desert nights that dropped cold without warning, stars sharp enough to cut the dark. About the way Rafe's horse walked the fence line, like it was searching for a gate that didn't exist. They did not talk about the men in town who whispered about maps and lines and new roads. They did not talk about the meetings waiting in the back room of the territory office. They did not talk about how Naya's father, Bram Redbird, had started using words like agreement and terms instead of home. They let the hours belong to no one. Rafe wasn't a landowner there. He was just a man leaning against a post, dust on his boots, bread in his hands. Naya wasn't a daughter being measured for a future she didn't want. She was just a woman sitting in the shade, listening to the wind move through boards and wire. Lila kicked her heels against the bench, humming to herself. At some point, Rafe stood. "Sun's dropping," he said. "My horse will start pacing." Naya nodded. "Lila's mother will be waiting." They walked a short way together, then stopped again, like the road itself had told them to. Rafe tipped his hat, not like goodbye, not like a promise. Just a mark of having been in the same place at the same time. Naya watched him go down the street, past the leaning buildings, past the place where the dirt turned back into open land. The town took him back like it had never given him up. Naya took Lila's hand and turned the other way. The wind moved through the empty porch behind them, carrying the echo of a conversation that hadn't happened. And for a while that was enough. The fence went up in a single afternoon. It wasn't a grand thing, just posts cut from pale wood and wire pulled tight enough to sing when the wind leaned into it. But when it stood, straight and unblinking across the low ridge, it changed the land. Paths that had always been there were suddenly told they had to go somewhere else. Naya watched from the shade of a mesquite tree as her father, Bram Redbird, stood with two men from the territory office. Papers lay flat on the hood of a wagon, held down by a stone. Ink darkened the page in careful, patient lines. Bram's hand moved slow when he signed, not because he didn't know what he was doing, because he did. The men nodded. The wagon creaked. The stone was lifted and put back where it had come from, like the land was being returned to itself after something had been taken. Naya felt it then. The way the ground could look the same and still not be the same at all. Creed Voss arrived that evening. He rode in without a hurry, hat low, eyes always moving. He leaned his shoulder against a post near the house and crossed his arms like he meant to stay. "I'm here to help," he said. Bram didn't argue. He didn't welcome him either. He just nodded once, the way a man does when he accepts weather he can't turn away. From that day on, Creed was there. When Naya walked to the well, Creed's shadow followed at a distance. When she crossed the open ground toward the road, his horse's hooves marked the dirt behind hers. He never came close enough to touch. He never went far enough to disappear. It wasn't protection. It was watching. Rafe stopped coming. At first, Naya told herself it was the heat, the kind that made even the birds go quiet and the town fold in on itself. Then she told herself it was work. Men like Rafe always had fences to mend, animals to count, lines to walk. But the horse trough stayed empty of him. May Carter shrugged when Naya asked. "He's been in and out of the territory office," she said. "Silas Vane's been riding with him. Papers, maps, the kind of things that don't leave much room for afternoons." Edith Crow didn't shrug. She looked at Naya over her spectacles and said, "Some men disappear before you even notice they're gone." The word stuck. Naya started seeing signs instead of seeing him. New stakes driven into the ground along the creek bed. Flags of red cloth fluttering in the wind, marking a path the water had always taken and now might not. Men with notebooks standing where children used to play in the shade. One evening, Naya found Bram sitting alone by the fence, staring out at the low ridge where the wire cut the land in two. "They say the water needs a clearer path," he said without turning. "They say it's for everyone's good." "And what do you say?" Naya asked. Bram's shoulders lifted, then fell. "I say the land doesn't belong to the words we put on paper, but the men with the papers don't listen to the land." He reached down and picked up a handful of dirt, letting it run through his fingers. "They brought up a marriage today," he said. Naya's breath caught, quiet and sharp. "With who?" she asked, even though part of her already knew. Bram looked at the fence. "With someone who can keep the line where it is." Naya thought of Rafe's pale eyes, the way he leaned on posts like he and the wood had an understanding. She didn't say his name. That night she walked to the edge of town. The buildings leaned like tired men. The saloon door creaked in the wind. The place under Edith's porch was empty. She went as far as the fence line and stopped. On the other side, Rafe's land stretched out, quiet and wide. She could see his house in the distance, a low shape against the fading light. There were hoof prints in the dirt near the road, fresh, leading toward the town, then turning away. Silas Vane's name moved through her mind like a cold thing. She understood then, Rafe wasn't just walking fences. He was walking lines that would decide where she stood in the world. Creed Voss's horse snorted behind her. "You shouldn't be out here alone," he said. Naya didn't turn. "I'm not alone." Creed shifted in the saddle. "You will be if you keep standing in places that don't belong to you anymore." The wind picked up, pulling at the wire. The fence sang, thin and tight, like something holding itself together by force. Naya placed her hand on the post. The wood was rough, unyielding. She thought of the hours in the shade, the sound of Rafe's horse walking the line at night, the way he had tipped his hat like the world still had room for small, honest gestures. For the first time, she let herself say it out loud, even if only to the land. "The man I trusted," she whispered, "might be the one drawing the map that takes everything from me." The fence answered with its low singing wire. And Naya stood there on her side of it, listening. The sun stood high and merciless, flattening the land into pale gold and shadowless brown. Heat pressed down on Naya's shoulders as she walked the long stretch toward Rafe Mercer's ranch, the small cloth bundle of cornbread warm against her side. The road felt wider out here, quieter, like the world had decided to step back and watch. She passed the last fence post and followed the thin track that cut through dry grass and stone. The wind carried the smell of dust and old hay. Somewhere far off, a bird called once, then fell silent. Naya expected to hear the horse before she saw the house. Rafe's old gray always made itself known. A soft shuffle of hooves, the creak of leather, the low breath of an animal that refused to lie down when night came. But the air held nothing. The gate stood closed. Naya slowed, her steps careful, like she was walking into a place that might break if she moved too fast. The wood of the fence was warm to the touch. The wire hummed faintly under the wind, a thin, tired sound. She lifted the latch. It didn't move. A chain ran through the metal loop, locked tight. Naya stepped back and looked past the fence. The corral was empty. No gray shape shifting in the dust. No water bucket tipped on its side. No fresh hoof prints pressed into the ground. The barn doors were pulled shut, their hinges still. The house sat low and quiet against the open land, its windows dark. Smoke did not rise from the chimney. The porch boards lay in clean, unbroken lines, as if no one had walked across them in days. Naya stood there, the sun burning the back of her neck, the bundle in her hands suddenly heavier than it had any right to be. She walked along the fence line until she found old Carter. He was sweeping the yard near the side of the house, his broom dragging slow arcs through the dust. His hat brim hid his eyes. His movements were steady, practiced, like a man who had been doing the same thing for most of his life and saw no reason to stop now. Naya stopped a few steps away. "Is Rafe here?" she asked. Old Carter didn't look up. The broom kept moving. "House don't sound like it's got a man in it," he said. Naya swallowed. "Did he ride into town?" The broom paused just for a moment. "He rode out," Old Carter said, "before dawn." "Where?" Old Carter shrugged, a small, tired lift of the shoulders. "Places a man goes when he's got papers in his pocket and no reason to stay." Naya's fingers tightened around the cloth. "Will he be back?" Old Carter leaned on the broom handle, finally lifting his head. His eyes were pale and worn, like wood left too long in the sun. "Could be," he said. "Could be he won't." Naya took a step forward, then stopped. The fence line between her and the house felt thicker than wire and posts. It felt like something you couldn't cross, even if the gate were open. She nodded once. "Thank you." Old Carter went back to sweeping. Naya turned away from the house and walked a few steps before the weight in her hands slipped. The bundle fell. The cloth opened. The cornbread tumbled out, hitting the dirt and breaking apart. Yellow crumbs scattered across the ground, disappearing into the dust like they had never been meant to stay whole. Naya knelt. She picked up a piece, then another. Each one left a streak of dirt across her palm. The bread didn't look like food anymore. It looked like something the land had decided to take back. She sat back on her heels, the sun beating down, the quiet stretching around her. It wasn't the emptiness of the house that cut the deepest. It was the understanding that settled in her chest, slow and heavy, like a stone finding the bottom of water. Out here, a man with land could leave. He could ride toward a line on a map, a meeting in a back room, a signature on a page. He could disappear into places where roads turned into names and names turned into power. A woman without land stayed where she was. The wind picked up, pushing a thin wave of dust across the yard. It lifted the loose crumbs and carried them away, scattering them toward the open fields. Naya stood. She brushed her hands on her skirt, leaving pale smears of flour and dirt behind. The mark didn't come off. She didn't try to wipe it away. She looked once more at the house. At the closed barn doors, the empty corral, the porch that held no footprints. Somewhere beyond the low rise of land, Rafe Mercer was moving through a world of papers and lines and men who believed they could decide where water ran and who it belonged to. Naya turned her back on the house and started toward the road. The sun followed her, unblinking. Behind her, Old Carter's broom dragged across the dirt, smoothing over the place where the cornbread had fallen, erasing the small, quiet sign that she had been there at all. Naya walked on, her shadow long and thin on the hot ground, carrying with her the knowledge that in the West, the land remembered some people and forgot others. There was no church, no bells, no flowers, no soft words meant to make hard things feel gentle. Just a low room at the back of the territory office, where sunlight slipped through a narrow window and laid a pale stripe across a scarred wooden table. The air smelled of ink, dust, and old paper. Outside, a wagon rolled past, its wheels thumping like a slow, steady heartbeat. Naya Redbird stood at one end of the table. Her hands were folded in front of her, knuckles white, her shoulders held straight by habit more than courage. The hem of her skirt brushed the floor where other people's boots had left their stories behind. She could feel the weight of the land on her back, even though it wasn't in the room. The creak, the low ridge, the fence that sang when the wind leaned into it. At the other end of the table, a man waited. His hat was off. His coat hung over the back of a chair. His hands rested flat on the wood, steady and sure. Naya did not look at his face. Preacher Lowell stood to one side, a thin book tucked under his arm. He cleared his throat, a small sound that tried and failed to fill the space between them. "We're here to witness an agreement," he said, "an understanding between two people for the keeping of land and the keeping of peace." Naya's father, Bram Redbird, stood near the wall. He did not meet her eyes. He watched the window instead, like he expected the land itself to walk in and speak for him. A chair scraped softly. The man at the table stood. Naya lifted her gaze. Rafe Mercer. The room seemed to draw in on itself. The walls felt closer. The stripe of sunlight on the table looked sharper, like a line drawn with a knife. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. Rafe's face was as she remembered it. Dust-colored skin, pale eyes that never rushed to meet anything. But the man standing in front of her wasn't the one who leaned against posts and talked about fences that sang. This man belonged to the room. "Miss Redbird," Preacher Lowell said gently. Naya stepped forward. The paper lay between them. Thick, official. The words on it were small and tight, like they didn't want to take up more space than they had to. She read the first line, then the second. Her name, his name, the land. Rafe's land. Her father's land. The thin, stubborn line of water that ran between them. Her throat felt dry. Rafe didn't speak. He didn't reach for the pen. He stood there still as a fence post set deep into the ground. Naya looked at him. "You knew," she said. It wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. It was just a statement. Rafe's jaw tightened. "I knew there would be an agreement." "And you didn't think to tell me who would be standing on the other side of it?" Naya asked. Rafe held her gaze. "I didn't think you'd be standing here at all." Silence dropped back into the room. Bram shifted near the wall. Preacher Lowell opened his book, then closed it again. "The land doesn't wait," Preacher Lowell said. "Neither does the office." Naya looked down at the paper. She saw the fence line in her mind. The cornbread in the dust. The horse that walked all night, looking for a place to lie down. She picked up the pen. Her hand shook once, then steadied. Rafe moved at the same time. Their signatures went down side by side, dark lines pressed into the page. The sound of the pen scratching across paper was louder than it had any right to be. When it was done, no one breathed. Preacher Lowell placed his mark at the bottom, slow and careful. He closed the book with a soft thump that sounded like a door being shut. "It's witnessed," he said. Rafe stepped back. Naya stayed where she was. For a moment, the only thing between them was the table and the paper that had turned them into something neither of them had chosen to be. "You didn't have to," Naya said. Rafe's eyes flicked to the window, to the thin slice of land visible beyond the glass. "Neither did you." They stood there, two people who had once shared bread and wind and quiet hours, now bound by ink and wood and the watching eyes of a room that belonged to power. Bram finally spoke. "It will keep things steady," he said. "That's all I ever wanted." Naya didn't answer. She turned and walked to the door. Rafe followed. Outside, the sun was bright and unbothered by what had just happened. Dust drifted across the street. A horse stamped its hoof somewhere down the way. They stopped on the wooden steps. "You still going to call yourself Ash?" Rafe asked. Naya looked at him. "No. What should I call you?" "My name," she said. "The one that doesn't fit on your papers." Rafe nodded once. "Then you can call me Rafe," he said. "Not the name they use in rooms like that." Naya held his gaze for a long moment. "Rooms like that," she said, "are where love goes to sit quietly and wait." Rafe didn't argue. They stood there side by side, not touching, bound by a table they had left behind. Inside the territory office, the paper lay flat and official. Outside, the wind moved across the open land, indifferent to signatures. And somewhere between those two things, something that had once been free found itself locked in a room made of ink and wood and power. The house sat in the middle of the land like it couldn't decide who it belonged to. One side faced the low ridge and the singing fence. The other looked out toward the road that led back to town. Wind passed through it from both directions, carrying dust, heat, and the distant sound of other people's lives. Rafe Mercer stood in the doorway the first night Naya crossed the threshold. "You'll take the east side," he said. "I'll keep to the west." His voice wasn't cold. It wasn't kind either. It was measured. The kind of voice men used when they wanted the world to stay where they put it. Naya nodded once. She walked past him without brushing his sleeve. Her room was small, a narrow bed, a window that looked out over the stretch of land where the grass grew thin and stubborn. The walls held the smell of old wood and sun. It wasn't a place meant for dreaming. It was a place meant for staying. On the west side, Rafe kept his habits. He rose before the light, walked the fence, checked the troughs, counted what little remained of a herd that once filled the fields. The old gray horse still refused to lie down at night, pacing the corral like it was guarding something it couldn't name. On the east side, Naya made her own lines. She swept the porch, drew water from the well, mended a tear in the wire near the creek where the fence sagged low enough for the land to almost touch itself again. She cooked simple meals and left half of them on the table, not as an invitation, not as a challenge, just as a fact. They passed each other in the narrow hallway, once in the kitchen doorway, once by the water pump. Each time they stopped, each time they stepped aside. The house learned their rhythm. It creaked differently under their footsteps. The floorboards began to know which weight belonged to which side. Hank Dobbs came through the yard most afternoons. He moved like a man who didn't want to be noticed and couldn't help being seen. He leaned on posts, checked locks, looked out over the land like he was measuring something in his head. "Town's talking," he said one day, tipping his hat to Naya and then to Rafe. "They always do." Rafe didn't answer. Naya kept pulling water from the well. Gideon Cross arrived with papers under his arm, boots clean enough to mark him as someone who didn't spend much time in the dirt. "Sign here," he told Rafe, setting the documents down on the table. "And here, and here." Rafe signed without looking up. Naya watched the ink soak into the page, watched another line get drawn that she couldn't step over. At the edge of the property, Dustmere folks gathered in twos and threes, pretending to admire the fence, the land, the sky. Their voices carried on the wind in soft, curious pieces. "Who's gonna bend? He's got the land. She's got the will." Naya heard them. She didn't turn. One evening, as the sun slid low and painted the fields in long, tired shadows, Rafe found Naya at the fence line near the creek. She was tightening a loose wire, her hands steady, her jaw set. "You don't have to do that," he said. She didn't look at him. "The fence doesn't care who owns it. It just knows when it's falling." Rafe stepped closer. The space between them closed like a door being nudged shut. "I didn't buy you," he said. Naya finally faced him. "Then don't try to place me," she replied. The wind moved through the wire, thin and sharp. They stood there, close enough to feel each other's breath, far enough to feel the weight of everything between them. That night, they sat at opposite ends of the table. A single lamp burned low, throwing a small, stubborn circle of light that didn't reach either wall. Rafe ate. Naya ate. The sound of their forks was the loudest thing in the room. "You don't trust me," Rafe said. Naya set her fork down. "Trust isn't something you sign for." Rafe nodded, like a man who had always known that and kept hoping he'd be wrong. Days passed. The old gray horse kept walking the fence at night. Naya started leaving a bucket of water near the corral. Rafe didn't mention it. He just made sure it was filled the next morning. The town kept watching, waiting for a raised voice, a slammed door, a sign that one of them would give way. But the ranch held two sides, and neither of them crossed. Not yet. The land stayed quiet, stretched wide under the sky, as if it knew this was not a fight that would be won with shouting or steel. It was a fight made of staying, of standing, of choosing every morning which side of the house you stepped out from and why. And in that quiet, stubborn space between east and west, something began to take shape that neither ink nor wire could fully contain. The fire burned low, a small, stubborn heart of light in the wide, quiet room. Its glow touched the walls and then fell back, leaving the corners in shadow. Outside, the wind found every loose board and made it speak. A thin whistle at the door, a soft groan along the roofline. The ranch breathed like a tired animal, trying to settle for the night. Naya sat at the table, her hands wrapped around a tin cup that had long since gone cold. The taste of dust still lingered in the air from the day's work. On the other side of the room, Rafe stood by the window, watching the dark move across the land. The old gray horse paced the corral. Hoof, step, pause. Hoof, step, pause. A steady rhythm like a clock that refused to forget time. Rafe turned. He did not walk toward her right away. He took a step, then another, slow and careful, as if the space between them were something fragile that might break if crossed too fast. "I don't want this to be another line on a map," he said. Naya looked up. The fire caught the edge of his face, carving it into light and shadow. He didn't wear his coat. His sleeves were rolled, his hands bare. He looked less like a man who owned land and more like a man who had learned what land could take from him. Rafe stopped a few feet away. "If you tell me to stop," he said, "I will." The words didn't land like a promise. They landed like a door being opened and left that way. No hand on the handle, no lock waiting to snap shut. Naya stood. The floor creaked under her boots, the sound sharp in the quiet. She could feel the house listening. The wind pushed against the walls, curious, impatient. She stepped closer. Rafe didn't move. Not forward, not back. She could see the small scar near his knuckle, the pale line of it catching the firelight. She remembered the day he had pulled Lila from the road, the dust on his coat, the way he hadn't asked for anything in return. You drew lines, she said. I was taught to, Rafe replied. Fences, boundaries, papers. It's how men like me learn to make sense of things. And what about now? Naya asked. Rafe swallowed. Now I'm trying to learn how not to. The wind surged, rattling the door in its frame. The lamp flickered. Naya took another step. Her heart beat loud in her ears, a steady, insistent sound that didn't care about agreements or offices or names written in ink. She thought of the creek, the low ridge, the fence that sang. She thought of her father's tired hands and the way the land had changed without ever asking her what she wanted. She looked at Rafe, not at the man who signed papers, not at the man who walked meetings and maps, at the man standing in front of her now, empty-handed. I'm not staying because I have to, she said. Rafe nodded. I know. I'm not staying because of the land. He nodded again. I'm staying because you're standing here, Naya finished. Not behind a table, not behind a fence. Rafe's breath left him in a slow, careful way. He lifted his hand, then stopped halfway, like he remembered himself at the last moment. Naya closed the distance. She took his hand and placed it against her shoulder, not pulling him closer, not pushing him away, just setting it there, like something that could be moved if it needed to be. Rafe's fingers trembled once, then steadied. The fire popped softly. Outside, the horse finally stopped pacing. Silence settled over the yard, wide and patient. They stood like that for a long moment, two people in a house that had learned their steps and their silences. The wind slid past the boards, searching for a way in, and found only the soft glow of a room that had decided, for this night at least, to hold. Rafe leaned his forehead against Naya's, gentle, unsure, like a man touching something he didn't want to break. I don't know how to do this without taking, he said. Naya closed her eyes. Then don't take. Stay. Rafe did. They moved to the chair by the fire, not in a rush, not in a tangle, just two bodies finding a place to rest. Naya felt the steady rise and fall of his breath. Rafe felt the warmth of her shoulder against his arm. No maps, no fences, just the sound of the wind and the low, stubborn fire. When the night grew deeper and the embers faded to a soft red, Naya did not get up. Rafe did not ask her to. Outside, the land lay wide and dark, holding its secrets the way it always had. Inside, for the first time since the table and the papers and the thin, sharp lines, something else took root. Not ownership, not agreement, choice. And in a place where most things were decided by whoever held the most ground, that choice felt like the bravest thing either of them had ever done. Mara Mercer arrived at the ranch just after noon, when the sun stood high and the land seemed to hold its breath. Her wagon rolled slow through the gate, wheels creaking like old joints. The driver tipped his hat and stayed back, letting her step down on her own. She didn't hurry. She never had. Her boots touched the ground like she meant to feel every inch of it before moving on. Naya watched from the porch. Mara Mercer was not a large woman, but she carried herself like someone who had learned how to take up space without asking for it. Her hair was threaded with gray and pulled back tight. Her eyes were sharp, the kind that noticed fences that leaned and words that weren't said. Rafe came out of the barn, wiping his hands on a cloth. Mother, Hinan, he said. Mara studied him for a moment. You look like a man who's been sleeping in a chair by a fire instead of a bed, she replied. Rafe almost smiled. They went inside. The house settled around them, the way it always did when new weight crossed its floorboards. Mara took the chair by the table, setting her gloves down with care. Naya poured water into a tin cup and slid it across to her. Their fingers brushed, brief and uncertain. Thank you, Mara said. It's hot out there. It always is, Naya replied. Mara's eyes flicked up, measuring, not unkindly. They sat in a small triangle of light from the window. Dust floated through it, slow and unbothered. I didn't come to talk about land, Mara said at last, or papers, or the office. Rafe leaned back against the wall, arms crossed, waiting. Mara looked at Naya. I came to talk about your father. The room went quiet. Naya's chest tightened. Bram Redbird? Mara nodded. I knew him a long time ago, before fences ran where they do now, Before water had a price, Rafe shifted but didn't interrupt. Mara folded her hands. We met on a stretch of ground near the old creek. He was fixing a wheel. I was trying to get my wagon unstuck from the mud. We both pretended we knew what we were doing. A small, soft smile touched her mouth, then faded. He talked about the land like it was a living thing, Mara went on. Not something you owned, something you stood with. Naya swallowed. We didn't have much time, Mara said. The world was already moving faster than we were. People came with maps and titles and words that didn't leave room for waiting. Rafe pushed off the wall. Why didn't you tell me, he asked. Mara looked at her son. Because you grew up in a world where love didn't stop fences from going up. I wanted you to learn how to live in that world before I told you how it almost was. She turned back to Naya. This marriage, Mara said, it wasn't just a trade. It was a hope, a foolish one, maybe, that what Bram and I couldn't hold on to, you and Rafe might. Naya felt the weight of the words settle over her like dust after a long ride. You believed we could fix it, she said. I believed you could choose differently, Mara replied. Outside, the wind moved through the wire. The fence sang, thin and familiar. Naya stood and walked to the window. She looked out at the land, at the creek line cutting through the dirt, at the posts standing stubborn and straight, at the wide stretch of ground that had carried so many footsteps before hers. It didn't start with me, she said softly. No, Mara agreed, but it doesn't have to end the same way it always has. Rafe stepped closer to Naya, not touching, just there. I don't want to live in a story someone else finished writing, he said. Mara nodded a slow, approving motion. Then don't. She rose, pulling on her gloves. I didn't come to give you answers, she said. I came to give you the truth. What you do with it is yours. At the door, she paused. Bram Redbird loved this land, she said, and he loved the idea of a world where his children didn't have to fight it every day. She looked at Naya, then at Rafe. Make something that doesn't need fences to stand. The door closed behind her with a soft, final sound. Naya and Rafe stood in the quiet she left behind. Naya turned to him. So this isn't just about us. Rafe shook his head. It never was. Naya looked back out at the land, at the sky stretched wide and patient above it. She understood then. She hadn't stepped into a story that began with her, but she was standing in the one that could end it. Not with ink, not with wire, but with the simple, stubborn act of choosing, again and again, how to stand on the ground beneath her feet. The change came quiet at first. A new stake in the ground by the creek. A red flag tied to a post where no post had been before. A man with a notebook standing in the shade, writing down things the land had never asked to be written. Then it came louder. Wagons rolled in with the seal of the territory office painted on their sides. Horses stood in the dust, heads low, tails flicking at flies that didn't care who owned what. Men unrolled maps across the hoods of wagons, fingers tracing lines that cut through grass, through water, through memory. The trail that ran past the Apache ground was marked for a new turn. The creek was given a name that didn't belong to it. A notice went up in town, nailed crooked to the post outside May Carter's store. Naya read it once, then again. The words were neat and final. They said where the water would go, where the road would run, where her people would not. She folded the paper and slipped it into her pocket like a stone she needed to carry. Rafe heard about it before he saw it. Hank Dobbs rode up in the late afternoon, dust on his hat and worry in his eyes. They're moving fast, he said. Office wants it done before anyone can raise too much noise. Rafe nodded. They always do. Gideon Cross followed, papers under his arm, boots still clean. There's a meeting in town, he said. Tonight. Witnesses, signatures. Rafe looked past him, out toward the low ridge where the fence cut the land into two careful halves. I'll be there, he said. The room at the back of the territory office was full. Dustmere folks lined the walls, murmuring in low, curious tones. Preacher Lowell stood near the door, book in hand, ready to mark whatever happened as something official. Maps lay flat on the table, weighted down with stones. Rafe stepped in. The talking didn't stop, but it changed. Men looked at him the way they looked at something that could either be useful or in the way. Naya walked in behind him. Not at his side, not behind him. With him, the man at the head of the table cleared his throat. Mr. Mercer, we were just about to begin. Rafe took off his hat and set it down. Then let's not waste time. The map was spread out like a wound. Rafe leaned over it, one hand flat on the paper. You've drawn the water line through ground that's been used by the Redbird family longer than any of us have been standing here. A man in a clean coat spoke up. The office has authority. Rafe nodded. So do I, on my land. Another man shifted. This isn't just about your land. Rafe looked at Naya. She met his eyes and stepped forward. It's about where we stand, she said, and where you're telling us we can't. The room went still. Rafe reached into his coat and pulled out a folded bundle of papers. He set them down on the table one by one. Deeds, he said. Witness statements. Records of the creek's path going back years. Preacher Lowell stepped closer, peering down at the pages. These are in order, he said slowly. Rafe didn't raise his voice. He didn't reach for his gun. He didn't even lean forward. I'm not here to stop the world, he said. I'm here to stop you from pretending you don't see the people standing in it. The man at the head of the table frowned. You're putting yourself in the middle of this. Rafe nodded. That's the point. Silence spread across the room, thick and heavy. Outside, a horse stamped. Someone coughed. Finally, the man sighed. We'll review the line. Naya felt her shoulders loosen just a fraction. When they stepped back out into the street, the sun was low, turning the dusk gold. Hank Dobbs tipped his hat. Gideon Cross gathered his papers, his face thoughtful now instead of certain. Dustmere folks drifted away in small, quiet groups, already turning the night into stories. Rafe and Naya stood on the wooden steps. You didn't have to do that, Naya said. Rafe looked out toward the open land. Yes, I did. They walked back to the ranch together, the road long and pale in the fading light. At the fence line, Naya stopped. She rested her hand on the post. Rafe did the same, his hand just inches from hers. I'm not standing here as your wife, Naya said. Rafe nodded. I know. I'm standing here as someone who keeps this ground, she went on. Rafe's mouth moved, something like a smile finding its way there. So am I. The wind moved through the wire. The fence sang, softer now, like it wasn't fighting itself as hard. Beyond it, the land lay wide and open, holding the marks of old paths and new lines, of footsteps that had come and gone. Naya and Rafe stood there together, not as owner and wife, not as deal and signature, but as two people who had chosen to be seen by the same piece of ground. And for the first time, the world beyond the fence did not feel quite so far away. There was no bright ending, no crowd, no speeches, no moment where the land lifted its head and said it had been changed. There was only the wind. It moved across the dry field in slow, patient waves, bending the thin grass and letting it rise again. Dust drifted in the air like something that had learned how to wait. The old gray horse stood under the sun, one hind leg cocked, eyes half closed. For once, it did not walk the fence. It did not count posts. It simply stood, breathing in the heat, breathing out the day. Naya sat by the wire with a small coil of metal in her lap. Her fingers worked steady and quiet, pulling the loose strands together, twisting them back into place. The fence no longer sang the way it used to. The wind still found it, but the sound had softened, like something that had learned how to hold without pulling itself apart. Rafe came from the direction of the creek, a wooden bucket in each hand. The water inside sloshed with every step. It caught the light, flashing bright and clear in a land that never gave anything without being asked twice. His boots left slow prints in the dust, marks that would fade by evening. He set the buckets down near the trough. The horse lifted its head, took a long drink, then went back to standing in the sun. Rafe wiped his hands on his trousers and leaned against a post, watching Naya work. You're making it crooked, he said. Naya glanced at the line she was mending. The land's crooked, Rafe nodded. Fair point. They fell into an easy quiet. The house behind them creaked as it always did, settling into the afternoon. Somewhere a bird called, then stopped. The sound of the world carried on without asking what they planned to do next. Naya finished the twist and tucked the wire back into place. She stood, brushing the dust from her skirt. It'll hold, she said. Rafe looked at the fence. So will we. They walked together toward the shade of the porch. The ranch didn't look different than it had a week ago or a month ago. The same low house, the same stretch of ground, the same sky, wide and unbothered. But something in the way they moved through it had changed. Naya poured water from one of the buckets into a tin cup and handed it to Rafe. He drank, then passed it back. She took a sip and made a face. Still tastes like dirt. Rafe almost smiled. Means it's honest. They sat on the porch steps, shoulders close but not touching. The wind slid past them, warm and familiar. Naya looked out at the field, at the place where the creek cut its thin line through the ground, at the fence that no longer felt like a wall so much as a marker of where they chose to stand. We didn't fix anything, she said. Rafe followed her gaze. No, we didn't change the office, Naya went on. Or the maps. Or the way people come with papers and tell the land what it's supposed to be. Rafe nodded. No, she turned to him. All we did was stay. Rafe met her eyes. Sometimes that's the part that costs the most. They sat with that for a while. The horse shifted in the sun. The field whispered under the wind. Naya thought of her father, of the way his hands had held dirt like it was something you could lose if you didn't pay attention. She thought of Mara Mercer's words, of stories that didn't start with her and didn't have to end the same way they always had. Rafe thought of fences he had built and lines he had followed, of maps that made the world smaller instead of wider. Neither of them said any of it out loud. Rafe stood and offered his hand. Naya took it. They walked to the edge of the field where the ground dipped just enough to catch the last of the light. The sun slid low, turning the sky a quiet, tired gold. They stopped there side by side. No papers, no witnesses, no one keeping score. Just two figures on a piece of ground that didn't care who owned it, only who stood on it and how. Naya felt the wind move past her, felt the warmth of Rafe's hand in hers. "This place doesn't promise anything," she said. Rafe nodded. "No, it just lets you try." They stayed. And in a land that had taught so many people how to leave, how to move on, how to draw lines and follow them somewhere else, staying felt like the bravest thing either of them had ever chosen to do. The sun slipped below the ridge. The field went quiet. Naya and Rafe stood there, not waiting for the world to change, just standing in it together.